The focus of this video is the principle of proportion. Watch all the videos in this series about the principles of design. Find related printable sketchbook pages on my website. Links are provided in the description below. Start by watching an overview of the elements and principles of design. In summary, elements of design are the basic building blocks for artwork. Principles of design are methods that can be applied to each of the elements. Opinions will differ about which items should be included as elements and principles of design. You will find varying lists. It is more important to understand and focus on how they are defined and used. Let's take a look at how Fernando Botero used elements and principles of design. His paintings are united by their proportionally exaggerated figures. He used a variety of saturated colors. Let's take a look at how Ted Harrison used elements and principles of design. He used rhythmic shapes for the landscape and the sky. He used harmonious colors. He made the figures at the bottom of his painting proportionally very small compared to the landscape. This makes the environment seem very powerful compared to the vulnerable figures. Let's take a closer look at the principle of proportion. Proportion may be described as the relationship between objects with respect to size and number. We can have equal proportions where shapes are the same size and the same dimensions. We can scale up or scale down shapes and maintain the dimensions proportionally. The shapes will look the same but will be bigger or smaller. We can scale shapes disproportionately and distort their likeness. The shapes will no longer look similar. The same can be said for three-dimensional forms, or space. Proportion also describes the relationship between objects with respect to number or amounts. The number of flower petals here is equal or proportional. The number of flower petals here is disproportional. We can have proportions in precise mathematical ratios, such as the golden section, or the rule of thirds. We can have proportion with shapes, proportion with forms, proportion with colors, proportion with lines, proportion with textures, and proportion with spaces. The principle of proportion can be applied to the elements of design strategically to communicate ideas. In our artwork, we can communicate that someone or something is more important or more powerful than everything else. In reverse, the principle of proportion can be used to create a feeling of vulnerability or frailty, or equality. Let's look at how the principle of proportion has been used by artists. In this official court portrait of a Chinese empress, the shape of the seated figure is proportionally larger than the shapes of the servants standing on either side of her. This use of proportion with shapes shows that the empress is more important than her servants. Likewise, the shapes of the central figures in this religious painting are larger than the other figures to signify their importance. These sculptural forms are very large compared to the viewer. The dramatic proportional relationship between the large sculptures and the viewer causes the viewer to feel small, while a feeling of importance or power and respect is extended to the subject of the work of art. Can we sometimes say the reverse when a work of art is proportionally small compared to the viewer? Claude Monet used the principle of proportion with color. A large proportion of his artwork has been painted with harmonious cool grays. A very small portion has been painted with a saturated hot color. The viewer's attention is drawn to this point of hot color. The difference in size creates an unbalanced, disproportional feeling. Leonardo da Vinci used lines as guides for pleasing proportions in these drawings of faces. Vincent van Gogh also used the principle of proportion with lines. The artist created a feeling of distance by making the lines proportionally thicker in the foreground and more delicate as the distance recedes. In this painting, the artist used the principle of proportion with texture. He used dramatic texture to create a feeling of power in the stormy sea, compared to the proportionally small and vulnerable figures at the bottom of his painting. Andrew Wyeth used the principle of proportion with space. The woman in this painting stands in a very large open field. Proportionally, she is very small compared to the vast space. The viewer is invited to imagine the vastness of the woman's task as a farmer, or the vastness of her plentiful harvest. Therefore, Andrew Wyeth has used the principle of proportion to convey a message. Let's take a closer look at the golden section. The golden section is a mathematical ratio, or a proportion. We can see the golden section as spirals in nature. We can see it in a galaxy, a hurricane, a snail's shell, or in plants. Historically, artists and architects have applied the same ratio to their works of art for pleasing results. This ratio is 1 to 1.618 and is known by many different names. Follow these steps to draw the golden section. Start with a square. Mark the center of the bottom side. Draw a diagonal line from the center bottom to the top left corner of the square. Using the bottom center as the point of rotation and the length of the diagonal line as the radius, draw an arc as shown. Draw a rectangle adjacent to the square that is the same width as the arc. The proportion of the square to the rectangle is the golden section ratio, 1 to 1.618. This rectangle is the same proportion as this rectangle. However, the positions have turned 90 degrees and the sizes are different. The size ratio is the golden section ratio. Because of the repeating proportions of these rectangles, we can continue to repeat this pattern. The proportions of these rectangles will remain the same. To draw a spiral, draw a quarter circle arc from the corner of the square as shown. Golden section proportions have been used in many logo designs. Let's try it. We can look at the Apple Corporation logo for inspiration. It was designed with the golden section. Print the Sketchbook activity page provided. A summary of the principle of proportion is given. Also, print the worksheets provided. Cut out the golden section rectangles. Arrange them on the grid. Glue them in place when you are happy with your arrangement. Combine adjacent shapes and add color. The success of this art exercise comes from the principle of proportion and shapes. What different ideas do you have for using the principle of proportion? Share your ideas with your friends. This is an important part of creativity. Add the information page and your artwork to your sketchbook. Add any additional comments. I'll see you back here soon with more art activities.